Good evening and welcome to the second installment of Coach's Corner. Today's episode will actually be focused on a topic that I've been involved in my entire life and is a very much a deep passion of mine in my life still to this day, which is baseball. And in particular, this will be in relation to new statewide pitch count rules. Okay, and the general philosophy behind pitch count rules and the trends of Tommy John surgeries and things like that. Okay, so here's what I would like to talk about. First of all, introduce you to the rules that our state, North Carolina, has adopted, and that's very briefly, if a pitcher throws 0 to 30 pitches in a game, then he can come back and pitch again the next day. 31 to 45 pitches, you have to skip a day before you can come back. 46 to 60 pitches, skip 2 days. 61 to 75 pitches, skip 3 days, and then 75 to 105 pitches, you skip 4 days, 4 full days rest before you can pitch again. And then there's the stipulation also that if you exceed 105 pitches during an at-bat, like if you start at 103 pitches and you throw number 104, 105, foul ball, foul ball, foul ball, you can go past 105 and finish that at-bat before you have to come out. Okay, and so the idea behind implementing these rules, and lots of states do this, I'm not sure that every state doesn't have some version of this at this point. The idea is to prevent young players from having to go through Tommy John surgery, and which has obviously become, if you're a sports fan, it's particularly a baseball fan, a nationwide phenomenon over the last decade, maybe 15 to 20 years, but certainly the last decade. And here are some things that I would like to talk about. First and foremost, let's talk about the pitch count rule and who would want to see that rule implemented from a baseball philosophical standpoint. A team's taking advantage of their ability to produce pitchers is what I'm getting at. Quite simply, this is an interesting paradox to many of the political arguments that I'll make in terms of economic outcomes. The larger the baseball program, much like the larger the corporation, the more interested they're going to be in applying these rules, okay? There's a very understandable reason for that. If I am a 4A baseball program, which is a traditional baseball program, meaning that their community focuses more on baseball than football or basketball or soccer or whatever, I know at the beginning of each season that I'm going to have 8, 10, 12 kids that are capable of pitching and pitching successfully. Whereas I coach at a local high school here, Robbinsville High School. It's a 1A baseball, 1A school. I may have a team in any given year where I don't have 3 kids that can accomplish this task successfully. I'm always going to have kids, I think, that can throw the baseball towards home plate, but that doesn't necessarily make you a pitcher. Okay, so the teams, much like a large corporation, that are in favor of these rules are the large teams or the large corporations that know that they have a statistical advantage in that they can produce a great multitude of pitchers, and implementing these rules on limiting the number of pitches severely limits their competition that doesn't have the availability of pitching arms at their disposal. All right, and it's no different at all than a big business lobbying and campaigning for certain regulations that they know small businesses cannot afford, cannot handle, cannot keep track of. Okay, it's the exact same thing. All right, so here's something that I would like to point out. And I have made this argument in front of the people that matter and to our conference chair people, and I've made this argument via email to the voices downstate and all that. So this is public knowledge. Everybody knows I'm against this. Okay. So number one, there are going to be unintended consequences. I realize what the intentions are, and they are noble intentions. You're trying to prevent arm injuries among young kids. I get that. The unintended consequences, first and foremost, I find it interesting in this day and age where equality is the message that's blasted across the megaphones, regardless of what we're talking about, whether it be politics or sports or whatever, or access to various programs. This particular rule, this particular philosophy is going to create more inequality, not less. And the perfect example here is this rule limiting applying different tiers for pitch counts will encourage coaches to actively try to run rule their opponent. All right. Quite obviously, if I can get through a game in 5 innings and not have to use another pitcher, or not have to have my pitcher cross a certain pitch total threshold and get to use him again in less number of days, or get to not have to use another pitcher so that I can use him to start the next game, I'm going to do so, and I'm going to make sure that I do so. And I'll provide you the example of my own from this past season, where I've already had a conversation with the coach, my opponent. Okay, we had the opportunity to run rule a team this year, and at the exact moment in the game, in the 5th inning, when we were up by 9 runs, I had a base runner on third base. And because I wanted to get my subs in, I wanted to get kids that didn't typically get to play in a game into the game. I inserted a freshman into the batting order, and as soon as I did so, I started thinking, if I don't end this game this inning, the kid that I have on the mound, I have to make a real choice here. He's my third pitcher. I can send him back out to the mound, and I feel very comfortable that we're going to win the game. But in 6 pitches, that kills him for the next game. All right, and I had already used my first 2 pitchers, my number 1 and number 2, earlier in the week. They were already limited and had already been disqualified because of pitch counts for that next game. My intention was to use my number 3 pitcher to start the next game. So what I did, after thinking through the situation and realizing that I was going to run out of pitches with this kid, I did a terrible baseball thing. And I admitted to the coach, I talked to him in private after the game. I asked my freshman, because I didn't know whether or not allowing him to swing the bat, if he would put the ball in play or not. I asked my freshman to execute a sacrifice bunt, a squeeze bunt, where I sent the runner from third base. And it was successful. He put the ball in play, and he did exactly what I asked him to do. Kudos to him. My runner scored. The game ended right there. I did not have to send my kid back out to pitch and waste those pitches. That's terrible, terrible baseball etiquette. But because of the rule, the implementation of the pitch count rule, I felt like that was the only chance I had to go ahead and attempt to win that next game using one of my better pitchers. All right, that's the kind of situation that these rules are encouraging. I know for a fact that other teams in our conference apply the same thought process, and why not? Of course, that's what you're going to do. You do not want to have to use all of your additional pitchers or risk sending your 6th, 7th, 8th kid out there to the mound in the next game, and you're going to risk not having a chance to win that next game by doing so. Okay. So the other unintended consequence that I think people that make these types of rules are probably, I'm guessing, not baseball minded specifically, particularly not pitching minded people, and they're probably getting influence from parents who are who see what's going on, and they think, it's unfair that this team gets to throw out 3 kids in a row that throw the ball 90 miles an hour. Well, let's try and implement a rule where we put a limitation on this practice, all right, or this team's ability to run these quality pitchers out there. What I mean here is I don't think that non-pitchers think about the mechanisms involved here in dictating the number of pitches into what those practices, those rules will lead to in terms of how a pitcher or a pitching coach goes about throwing their baseball game. Okay, here's the example. The easiest pitch in baseball to throw for a strike is the fastball. Okay, it's the hardest pitch. You throw it straighter. It's easier to keep in the strike zone. Okay, with a pitch count rule, you don't want to throw secondary and tertiary pitches as often, precisely because often in high school it's a wasted pitch. Okay, you don't want to use those additional pitches outside the strike zone as frequently with the pitch count rule, because you never know how many of those pellets you're going to use, how many of those pitches you're going to use throughout the course of the game. You're not going to intentionally waste pitches as often, and it's going to severely limit the number of pitches that are secondary and tertiary for your high school kids that you're willing to call and willing to throw as a pitching coach or as a head coach, whoever's making those decisions. Okay? So fastball becomes a much more predictable pitch in terms of what the hitter sees, okay, what the offense sees. If you're increasing the number of fastballs for a pitcher, you're going to increase the likelihood of a kid getting injured, because you're asking them to throw at full arm speed, full velocity more often. Okay. The second part of that equation, in particular, in relation to throwing higher percentage of fastballs, if you know that the hitter knows that fastball is occurring more often, as a pitching coach or as a pitcher, a pitching-minded kid, you're going to try your best to increase the velocity of your fastball, because you know that increased velocity is much more difficult to hit. Velocity is the variable that I would like to discuss in relation to pitch count. Okay, it is insane. It is utterly asinine for somebody to believe that it's the number of times you throw the baseball that is the magic variable in this discussion. That is so incorrect. It's hard for me to wrap my head around this, just to be honest with you. I'll get into some of these statistics. Okay, got them highlighted. Just in a common sense kind of approach, think about baseball that you were watching as a kid growing up, or as a fan, as an adult growing up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, early 90s. You watched Nolan Ryan and Tom Glavine and go back to Cy Young and Sandy Koufax and these guys. They threw complete games all the time. And in fact, I can't remember the statistic on Nolan Ryan, but I want to say it was something like 15 to 20 times he threw complete games where he threw more than 140 pitches. Never missed a start. Never had an arm injury. It's about how you take care of your body and what your body is capable of, and things of that nature, more so than it is the number of times you throw the baseball. All right. In today's game, you have a massive increase in the number of specialized pitchers. Okay, and what I mean by that is you have teams are made up, a lot higher percentage of their roster is used on bullpen guys that come in to face one batter or two batters or one inning worth of work on the mound. So you come in to throw, and you know that you're only throwing for one inning. You can throw as hard as you want every pitch. Okay. The number of pitchers throwing more innings has decreased at an exponential rate since the mid-1990s. Okay, and you can look back through even to as recently as the year 2000. Look at the trend from the year 2000 to now, and analyze. Just go Google number of qualified starters for the ERA title. You have to cross a certain innings threshold to even qualify for that title in Major League Baseball. You know, at one time in my life, you would have 150 qualified starters in the National League and American League that, as far as meeting those innings limits that qualified for the ERA title. Now you may have less than 30 in the total Major League Baseball. It is not the number of pitches. That's not correct. The velocity, that's the only variable that matters. The only variable that positively correlates to the increase in Tommy John surgeries over the course of my lifetime is the increase in the velocity of the baseball being thrown. Period. Okay? Obviously, you will never, ever have anyone at any level of baseball suggest that we place a maximum limit on the velocity of the baseball coming out of the pitcher's hand. That would be absurd, right? Right. So the do-gooders, trying to find a solution to this Tommy John phenomenon, will find something to pick on, all right? And it's the number of pitches being thrown. And I think that probably has more thought based in the desire to limit a team's use of their best pitcher so that they don't lose as often to that pitcher. That's my guess, okay? But let's talk about this this variable here of velocity, okay? By the way, you can go to Fangraphs.com, and I actually pay a $5 per year subscription fee to get access to the broader data here. But statistical charts about number of pitches thrown, velocity, things like that, going back to, I believe, to 1978. And but here I have highlighted a chart which shows in the year 2017 there were 202 pitchers in Major League Baseball that went to the pitching mound that had Tommy John surgery at some point during their career. And here's what I have found in looking at this chart. The ones that I have highlighted, 71 of these pitchers, I know for a fact, throw the baseball consistently above 95 miles an hour. Of these 202, there were 72 that I had no idea who they were. Okay? Could be a minor league guy that only made 1 or 2 appearances. I don't know who these people are, so I don't know whether they throw 95 plus or not. So that leaves 130 guys that I have heard of. Of those 130, 71 that I know for a fact have thrown consistently throw above 95 miles an hour. I have a purple circle around 26 of these pitchers, okay? 26 of these I know for a fact do not throw the baseball 95 miles an hour, okay? And I can cite 3 or 4 of these guys off